Your agents aren't the reason your AI workflow feels so frustrating. It's because your setup is fragmented. You've downloaded skills, stacked rules on top of rules, and scattered context across tons of chats across different AI models, probably. So now you spend more time fighting and steering your agents than getting work done. And adding another skill won't actually fix that. What you're missing is what I wish I had from the beginning: the right folder structure and then the right system. I would have avoided so much of this heartache. So in this video, I'm going to show you what actually sits underneath my systems, because it's not hundreds of skills, a giant rule book, or an Obsidian graph. It's how the files, workflows, skills, the learning loop, and the AI second brain all work together. And by the end, you'll have a clear blueprint and a look under the hood for building your own living system, and one that learns from your feedback, carries more of your fingerprints, and lets Claude Code, Codex, Kimi, GLM, or whatever model comes next do the same work just as well, if not better, every release. Now, the very first thing I'll tell you is I'll die on this hill. I think the most important skill anybody using AI today could learn is to build the right file structure and to build the right system. If you understand those two things, and it comes down to really how you organize your files in your folders and then plug agents into them, you are able to do far more. You can start deleting more and actually end up using like 15 to 20%. So by the way, this is where I was before. And this is the problem a lot of people run into. AI is very capable. The models are incredible, but they feel like they're getting worse all of a sudden when over time, and you're like, oh, it used to be so great. You actually have a structure problem. And that problem shows up no matter if you're using Codex or Claude Code. It shows up when you have your script writing, your video editing, your app building, you're doing your emails, you're trying to ideate or brainstorm. Like, oftentimes you don't have a clear folder structure, and then there's not a clearly defined process. And so basically what you compensate with is you're like, oh, I need to solve this problem. So you like download 1,000,001 skills, you keep adding a bunch of rules, and then the bigger problem that you run into is there's no cross-model memory. But what you end up with is a messy agent that feels like it forgets, like you keep correcting it over and over and over again, or it's frustrating because it just like seems like it's not doing anything quality. So what happens is what you really wanted was here, right? You had this outcome, you downloaded skills for something to achieve a certain outcome. But over time, as you add this mountain of skills and rules, right? You keep updating and adding and updating and adding and throwing stuff. Your agents will actually optimize their work to make sure they check this box, check that box, and there might be contradictions. They miss all of the context from your chats, right? You have this one-off in a chat over here, but like, okay, you forgot to update it into the skill or any of that stuff. So your agent is following every rule, but then it just feels lifeless. And then it's like performing worse. And then the next thing that you run into is agents have their own fingerprint, right? Claude has its own way of doing this, and don't get me started on the Claude watermark. But then Codex has its own kind of fingerprint. But then what happens is because it's performing so badly, I don't know, maybe it just sounds inhuman. You're like, let me download the humanizer skill, right? To erase more of the AI fingerprints. But what starts happening is you're erasing more of the AI fingerprints, but yours are still stuck over here. Then the two last thoughts I'll leave you with before we start getting into the actual solve here, and I'll walk you through this, is Claude Code and Codex and any other agent harness, they have their own memory, right? And that actually lives on your folder, but only Claude Code can access its memories, and only Codex can access its memories. And they're walled off. So never get stuck with one model, because things change and better ones come out, cheaper ones come out. So set up the right system so you can swap out different models and carry your own fingerprints. And then Obsidian, this may be a trigger, is just way out over here, right? And Obsidian isn't an agent brain, but it's been marketed as the agentic brain. It's a second brain. And then you tried it, and then you're like, a bunch of BS. Like, I opened it and got a cool graph, but it actually didn't help me at all. I'll show you how to integrate it. So The problem is you don't need more instructions. You don't need more skills. You actually need less of those, but you need a better workflow and a cleaner system. So let's dig into what we need. You don't need to build the perfect agent. Let's go over here to how we build this now. So what you build is a clean living system. And I'm going to show you mine exactly. I'll show you examples of folders and all that fun stuff. I teach all this in the AI Builders community below, so that way people get set up correctly the first way. It is a school community. However, I don't believe in gatekeeping everything, so it's extremely valuable for everyone who gets value from videos like these. So I'd recommend you check it out, the link's below, but you don't have to access it just to learn this. This is stuff that I want to give away value for free. So the clean living system. They're really like, you don't need a perfect agent. You need the right system that you can drop any agent into. And so you'll see, I actually use Claude Code and I use Codex interchangeably as well as some of the open weight models. But you want a clean living system that any one of those capable agents can use. And the system really has 3, maybe 5 layers, but I'll call it 4. The system starts with your main project folder, right? So if you're watching this video, you probably have a good idea what a project is, but all a project is something you're working on. You have your script writing project, you might have your AI video editing project, whatever. That is where everything lives. So you need a project file, you need a clear workflow, and then you'll have a few purpose-built skills in there. You need a learning loop, and then you need a shared second brain. The model just works within that system. Claude can use it, Codex can use it, the next model can use it. They will change without taking away your entire work with it. So make sure you own a system like this and build. This is the way that I think is so important. So let's talk about clean project files. So I've got my AI builders set up, right? So every single one of my workflows lives, let's just say my content operating system here. I have my video, my carousel operating system, but inside the carousel, right? Clean does not mean pretty, by the way. My folders don't look pretty, but the setup here is really clean. So I've got my agents or Claude MD, and that's straightforward. You always need to have one of those. That tells every agent how it works right now, right? Here's what the system does. Here's where everything lives. It's kind of their map for how to jump into here. So again, clean files doesn't mean a beautiful folder tree, but it means the agent can jump in and orient itself without asking you to explain the whole project again. So it contains like what exists now, right? Like that's what the agents in Claude MD contain here, but that all just kind of lives right in here. All the instructions, basically how this whole thing works, right? So that lives in there. So a messy setup, all of your knowledge is going to be trapped in your chats and in your head, but a clean setup is one project where the files explain the work. So your chats should not be the only place where your project makes sense. This is just basic one. All right. So the second thing that I want to talk about is the workflow. So every one of my projects has this workflow in it. And so if we go here to a workflow, what it captures is the process. And that means, like, I use this for my research, my script writing, my video editing, and it tells it like where to start, what happens next, what done means, when it needs approval, when it can move to the next step. So I use it again for editing, filming, publishing, script writing, and app building. The workflow gives the agent a path, and then the agent has guardrails on how it works. So the workflow tells the agent where it is, but then you have skills along the way that help the agent perform a specific step in the process. So start with a process before you start building skills. This is an example of what mine looks like. This is my carousel operating system. This is for Codex, but I tell it, here's what this looks like at the end. Here's the process. Here's how an idea starts. Here's the sequence of how we do this all the way through. And then these are commands that it uses internally for itself. But then I have some rules here and then where everything goes. So the agent actually really only works off of, there's one skill in here that it uses along the way, because this is pretty simple. But now I can drop in Claude or Codex or whatever, and they accomplish it exactly the same way. So when you have a clear process defined here in a workflow, The agents don't have to have 7,000 skills. They only use them when they need them. And then you have performance. So let the powerful models do what they need to do, right? You just need to know what done looks like, when to bring you in. This is like the foundational stuff of loop engineering, if you've heard that term already. And let them perform. They keep doing more and more and more without you, but as long as you know the process, they'll follow it. The next layer that I want to talk about is the learning loop, right? So the learning loop here, every single one of my like heavy files uses a learning loop. So inside of there, I give it feedback. It reads for patterns in my feedback, and it learns from its mistakes. So let me show you what it looks like. And I have this one. A good example of this is in my video editor. Again, this is like a giant thing, but there's this learnings folder here. So every single time there are learnings, right? I have different Instagram reels and TikTok styles that I like. This style 4 I've been using lately. This contains, after every single build, every single chat. Let me see if I can actually just show you the chat first on how it ends. Okay, all right. I feel super weird just sharing myself here on screen, but that's fine. But at the end of this, I did a whole video editing session. And at the end of it, you can see how it recorded the learning review, right? So it like added things to the learnings and it added things to memory, which is actually really cool. And what that means is, let me just pull up what's inside of this learning pathway. So after every session, it writes a date stamped learning log here. And you can see what's active versus like inactive, but this contains like all the different reels that I've done. And what it does is, as I share feedback in the conversation, it kind of captures that, right? So that way, all of my chats, it doesn't just stay locked away in that one chat. The feedback, it takes my feedback because I want more of my fingerprint right there. So it takes my feedback, it learns from that. It also recognizes patterns. And then any mistakes that it does along the way or things that failed, it automatically records those. And then what happens with it is, let's go ahead and pull up what the second layer, which is called a registry. Now, that's just technical because I let Codex and Claude Code do what they need to do. But inside this registry, if there are issues that it notices or I give feedback, it puts them into a watch queue. So it starts monitoring itself and it's starting to look for a pattern. Did the placement of a motion graphic need to go here versus here? And then if it happens, you can see right here, it's only happened once. But if it happens twice right here, it'll notify me and say, hey, this is 2 times now that this has occurred. Does this need to be added as a consistent rule? And for the ones that happen twice, if I approve it, I can say yes, like promote it. It needs to be a rule. This is how it needs to go forward. Any mistakes it makes along the way, it just self-corrects and adds that into its process. But then this allows you to take your fingerprints, because you don't just want less AI fingerprints. You want your fingerprints. Take your fingerprints, you put it into the learning, so your agents learn. It goes in the dedicated folder. Your learning goes to improve your workflow. So now you kind of have this self-improving kind of step. The last thing is your second brain. So the second brain, all an AI second brain is its files and folders. That's all it is. And they're interlinked together. So inside Obsidian, you have, which I love Obsidian. Obsidian is not a second brain. All it is just a better visual representation that humans can look at. So these are all of my files and folders and inside of my agent brain. And the graphs are there because of the linking. Now, what I want to show you is the inside of your agent brain, your second brain. This is where your workflows and learns will feed your second brain. Your second brain should carry the context. Who are you, your business, things that you wanted to remember, things along the way. But the most important part is the context. So let me start back here, the backbone. This is like who your ICP is. Who are you selling to? What's your voice look like? How do you talk? What are your preferences? That should live in your backbone. Then the context. So every single decision that gets made, I have in my setup that if I'm trying to solve a problem, boom, that context gets saved to the agent brain. If I change a workflow or I make different decisions based off of a brainstorming session, that gets logged. And then it captures the why. So your entire story lives here, and then the agents will actually reference it first. So the brain is actually interlinked to this whole system. It's not separated. It just becomes a flywheel for everything. So the brain is all the context. It has the full story of all the decisions and learnings along the way. Every time I have conversations, big sessions, these actually get logged to the brain automatically. And then I have a weekly routine that runs just before my credits reset that just does a clean, just oftentimes the conversations are pretty good about catching something and saying, great, all right, we finished up a decision or a build or whatever, write it to the brain. But I have it just in case. I have a clean sweep. It reads all the conversations for my week and just makes sure all that context got brought back into the second brain. So the second brain, how it's organized, it's just files and folders. That's it. All Obsidian does on top of it is it lets you see this better. So you don't have to have Obsidian or Graphify. It's just files and folders. But everything gets written to a raw folder, which right now this is empty, I think. Oh, got a couple things in here. So this is active and living. These are all the decisions, changes, updates, research, and then it all gets written into here. So I'll show you an example of agent ops. What makes this really useful and easy for agents to navigate is right inside of here. This is a session we had for how I wanted to recycle carousels. This is what it's related to. So this is called front matter. This tells us here are all the other things that it's related to. So instead of my agents having to figure out, okay, I have to read every single folder that's in here to get the context, they just follow the linkage. They're just navigating links versus having to read entire folders. But then all the background and story, so for the playbooks, as learning changed, I made updates to workflows, it updated that directly into here. So as an example, literally just last night, I was changing my script writing flow. I actually wanted to simplify some things and delete a bunch of stuff. All of that at the end of the session recorded it back into the agent brain. That captures all of it, writes it right back in real time, and that makes it useful. So your second brain carries that setup of a folder, carries all the context. Your system is what you drop agents into, and then this thing just becomes a flywheel. Now you use skills right where they're useful and where they're the most needed. So what I want to recap here is why this matters so much more is the memory is interchangeable for every single model going forward. Now they have all the historical context, all the changes, they have the why. And so if you're working with just one model like I showed here, they'll remember stuff, but it's closed off. And you don't have any control of how that memory gets saved. It's just at Anthropic's control or Codex's control. The shared system becomes valuable because you have different agents and different models you can drag and drop directly into this. Your identity and workflow is not trapped in conversations, right? You establish a clear workflow first. All of your conversations, all of your learnings, that feeds your second brain. Your learnings improve the workflow. The workflow has more freedom for your agents to work. As you change things, it goes to your second brain. And as models get better, you don't just have to use Claude Code or Codex. Use GLM, use Kimi, whatever. It becomes a flywheel over time. So you're not making every model remember you independently. You're giving every model access to the same system and the same record every single time in this workflow. So in closing, this is the flywheel. Your work gets completed, your feedback comes back, the feedback gets captured and classified, the relevant workflow, examples, rules, those get improved. Your brain gets improved with the decisions and the why and the context. The next agent starts from a better system because it's self-improved. And that means you're repeating yourself less, you're steering the agent less, fewer mistakes, cleaner handoffs, and there's more of your judgment and your fingerprints in the entire system. So it doesn't magically improve without your input. Leverage comes from making sure your input isn't wasted after one chat. So that should feed everything over here. And then the magic, it's never the model, it's the system. So over time, the system is going to contain more of your fingerprints and less of the AI kind of defaults. So remember, a pile of instructions isn't a system. Your workflow is the spine. Skills are tools that they use along the way. Everything should improve itself over time. So don't erase AI's fingerprints, put yours back in, but own the system and rent only the models. So in the spirit of not gatekeeping stuff, I walked you through this here. Again, this is just one of the fundamentals of the setup that I teach inside of AI builders, but I also have the entire setup below in the captions. So there's a link down below with basically the kickoff prompt that sets up this entire system. So that way you improve. So it's a whole new world. It's a lot simpler, a lot less frustrating, and way more efficient. So have fun. Good luck. Ping me if you have any questions. Like and subscribe if this was helpful for you today.